Welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your day. You probably know me, but I'm Jason Odell, and my website is luminescentphoto.com. And what I want to do today is just kind of go over this relatively new, sort of new software from Topaz called Photo AI. And I'm going to go through a little bit about what it does, how I use it. In fact, let me bring up the overview of what we'll be doing today. So what I'm going to talk about today is here. And I want to talk about what is Photo AI, some of its benefits, and best practices and how you can integrate it into your workflow, as well as some drawbacks of the software and how I work things around. If you know me at all, you know that in general, I try to minimize the number of third-party plugin tools that I use. The more I can do directly in my raw editor, the better, right? So the plugin software, there's a ton of things out there, but it's got to be pretty good or serve a very specific use case or do something better than what I can do, say, in Lightroom or Photoshop to begin with. And I think, and I've discovered that this product from Topaz, the newest Topaz plugins, really do that for me. They really provide value, and Photo AI is just the newest one, and it came out recently. So let's talk about this a little bit. What is the Photo AI product? Well, really what it is an integrated version of their other three plugins that they came out with over the last couple of years. It's a sharpening, noise reduction, and image upsizing, up-resing tool that are all integrated into a single application. Okay, so in the past, there were separate applications to do this, and that gets kind of clunky. And if you think about it, noise reduction and sharpening and up-resing are all kind of integrated. They are all things that need to be considered when you're performing one of those routines. If you're going to sharpen, you need to make sure your noise reduction settings are different. If you're going to apply noise reduction settings, you might need to alter your sharpening settings. And both of those things are going to affect if you're trying to scale up your images. Now, Photo AI uses the artificial intelligence algorithms for subject detection and to apply the sharpening, the noise reduction, the upscaling intelligently across the image, so it can sharpen different parts of the image. And eventually, what it's going to do is replace the original 3 AI-based standalone plugins that Topaz came out with in the last couple of years. And these are Sharpen, Denoise, and Gigapixel AI. And it makes sense. Now, I've been using the Sharpen and to a lesser extent the Denoise for a while now, and I've really liked it. It does some wonderful things algorithm-wise. And so what I'm seeing now with Photo AI is that these are being merged into that software, and eventually these tools will be refined. So one thing I should caution you about right away is that Photo AI is in still version 1.0.10 or something like that. It's getting updated almost every week. So it's still very new, and it has a few rough edges that I'll go into, but I have a lot of, I'm optimistic about where it's going to go. Okay, so what are the benefits then of Photo AI? I've kind of alluded to them a little bit. You've got these interdependent functions: noise reduction, sharpening, and if needed, up-resing, combines them into a single application. And that's really important because it allows you to visualize the effects of each of these algorithms and refine them together and make adjustments to them together so that you're not guessing. You say, well, how much noise reduction do I need? Or how much sharpening do I need if I'm going to do noise reduction? And ironically, if you had the suite before, the Sharpen AI program has some low-level noise reduction built in, and the noise reduction program has some sharpening built in. So it just kind of makes sense that all of these things could get merged into one product. Now, in my opinion, and this is just me going through images for the last couple weeks here, and since I've been using it, I'm really seeing superior noise reduction compared to what I could get in Lightroom. And if you've taken my Lightroom classes, you know that I choose most of the time to stick in Lightroom for noise reduction simply because the workflow ramifications get disrupted every time I have to make a TIFF file or go into Photoshop or whatever, right? So anytime I could stay in Lightroom, I would do it. And generally this involved me using masking and applying noise reduction selectively. Photo AI will do this for you automatically. And then the other side of it is that some of the sharpening algorithms can really resurrect images that I thought were trash. If you've got a slightly soft or blurred image, and I'll go through some, it's really good what it does. And in fact, sometimes it's just magical. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. Sometimes it works magic. It's not 100% accurate, but it can be really good when it works. You can also use it to upscale images over 4x linearly. So it's huge images. Now, that's not something I normally do, but it comes in handy if you are say going back to old images, you know, images that you may have captured 10 or 15 years ago with a 6 megapixel camera or even less. You can upscale those and make salvageable, pretty good size prints from these. Okay, so that's all good stuff. And then the other nice thing, and this is one area where it has a slight advantage over the 3 previous plugins. It not only works directly on your raw image files. Okay, the previous images plugins, excuse me, would do that, and you can save that file as a DNG, which preserves all your camera settings. But the kicker is, and this is the new part, is that there's a way to invoke it directly from Lightroom Classic. You don't have to go into the standalone app, create a DNG, and then re-import the file. This will all happen for you. And that's a small thing, but it's a non-trivial thing because it makes the workflow a lot easier, at least for me. When you use the other plugins from Lightroom, you're always exporting out a TIFF. You're not opening the original raw file with edits. So there's pros and cons to both of those. We can talk about that a little bit. Okay, so how has this changed my workflow? Like I mentioned, I generally avoid creating derivative files unless there's true value in doing so. So, you know, I need to go to Photoshop because I'm gonna, you know, use tools that are only there, or I'm gonna use my plugin environment. Those of you who follow me know that I often use creative plugins like Silver Effects. So when it came to things like simply sharpening, noise reduction, upscaling, I really avoided using third-party software because it didn't give me a tremendous benefit over what I could get out of my raw editor by itself. But the tools now in the Topaz plugins and Photo AI particularly are so much better that it does make a strong case for using this tool more frequently. It's not something I'm going to run every image through because it's just not necessary, but it gives me an opportunity to possibly get better quality out of tricky images. So to that end, I've got shots that I probably would have tossed before. I do a lot of bird photography. I did some photography at air show recently where I was panning and things were just, you know, it's hard to pan. You get softness and blur. And that softness was just almost impossible to recover with Lightroom by itself. But the sharpening and noise removal algorithms in the Topaz products, they just do an incredible job. And Photo AI is just the evolution of that. So I'm reducing the threshold. I'm lowering the threshold for wildlife shots for what I would consider to be acceptable sharpness. So because I now have to think, hey, wait a minute, this one's a little soft on the eye, but I might be able to bring this back using something like Photo AI or Sharpen AI. So that's really cool. Fewer throwaway shots. So let me talk about how you integrate it in your workflow, and I will go in and do a little demo of some images that I have already in my Lightroom catalog where we can look at this. There's a couple of different use cases, and I just want to outline them first because everybody's workflow is a little different. I don't expect you to do exactly what I do. So there's a couple different ways to use this particular application. So the first way, you can use it as a standalone. You can just launch it, open an image, either raw or any format, and just create a secondary file, a copy, and run the product. So you can use that if you are, for example, using something that isn't Lightroom or Photoshop, or you want to use it on non-raw images that you might have lying around. You can just use the standalone application. It runs all of the algorithms. You can use it as a Lightroom plugin, and you can use it as a Photoshop plugin. Okay, the only difference in the tool itself is that from Lightroom, you have the opportunity to run it either directly on the raw file, and it will create a copy in DNG format, and there's no downside to that. Or you can run it as an external editor on a processed image. On Photoshop, it's going to run on a layer, and it's going to run on the rasterized image. And the only component of this that you cannot use in Photoshop, if I recall, is the up-resing feature. So you can't increase the size from the Photoshop plugin, and that's true with Gigapixel as well. But from Lightroom or the standalone plugin, you can do all three of those routines: sharpen, noise, and up-res. So the question really is, do you want to send it a raw file? Or do you want to send it something like a TIFF file? In other words, do you want to use this on the front end as a pre-processing tool? Or do you want to use it on the back end as a post-processing tool after you've done all your adjustments? And the answer isn't simple. It is not straightforward because it really kind of depends on how you've edited and how you want to use it. And let me just give one use case. Let's say you want to, the advantage of sending your raw file over to the product is that it can work on the noise side of the house very much better. It can do a better job because it's got the actual raw data to analyze, and I'm seeing some improvement there. On the other hand, when you return that DNG to your editor, whether it's Photoshop, Lightroom, whatever, that file is going to have the noise reduction and any sharpening baked into it. You can't undo it. Even though it's raw, it's baked in there. So raw workflow is really good for the noise reduction and potentially the upscaling, whereas the TIFF base, or the post after you've edited, is good for things like sharpening, where maybe you want to have a master file left alone without too much sharpening baked in, and I'll show you why. Okay, so let's talk about, I'm going to go through some best practices later, but let me go ahead and just go into Lightroom. And for those of you who are putting things into the chat, I am seeing those. I will address them after I go through everything, because hopefully I'll be able to answer those questions. Okay, so I want to show you first just an example. This image that I have here is an image that I have used forever in my online training stuff, and it is an old photo of my old dog from 2007 or something. I took this with a D2X, Nikon D2X, and I shot it at ISO 1600. And if you remember that back in those days, ISO 1600 was considered very high ISO, and for that camera it was actually above spec. It was a higher ISO than what was in spec with the camera. And if I just go and look at this, I could run my normal noise reduction algorithms and do all those things. Let's see. And you can try to run noise reduction on this, and you know, from your detail panel, and you can try to preserve as much detail as you can. And, you know, it doesn't do a terrible job with Lightroom, but here I'm cranking noise reduction way up, and things can get really smeared if you're not careful. So you see how if I don't crank up the detail. So what I want to do though is compare that to the image that I ran through Photo AI. So let's just do a quick compare. So the Lightroom is on the left and the Photo AI is on the right, and you can just see how much more detail comes out. In fact, this is at 200% here, so you're seeing a really large version. This is probably a little bit too sharp, but you can just see how much clearer the noise reduction is, especially in the background. Even at strong noise reduction settings, it doesn't get rid of that granular noise as well. So this is just a you know, one of my tests to say, is this better or not? And my answer was, this is really way better than what I was using. So let me show you one way where you can use the software. And so to do it first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up an image that I took. I took this image at an air show not that long ago, and it's World War II plane, and I was panning, and you can see when I zoom in here that I am you know, there's some motion blur. You can't help it. I'm trying to pan with a moving subject. And I wanted some prop blur. I had to use a slower shutter speed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it into the Topaz product. Now there's two ways to do that. And the first time, the first way I'm going to show you how to do it is just the traditional post-processing way. So let's just say I went through this and I edited things and I adjusted everything, and I want to send that edited image into the Topaz Photo AI. What you'd want to do before you do anything else is turn off all of your sharpening and all of your noise reduction. Just turn them to 0. Set everything here in your detail panel to 0, or whatever your tool is, just set it to 0. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do the traditional edit in. So you go Photo, Edit in, and I'm going to choose Edit in Topaz Photo AI, and it's going to say Edit a copy. Sure enough, it's a TIFF. I've set these components up, the options, and you say Edit, and it's going to bring up Photo AI. So what Lightroom is doing here is just making that TIFF. And then what happens is it's going to run its automated settings. So there's got this thing called autopilot, which is the initial routine. And I have mine set up to just do some basic noise reduction. So let me back up for just a second. I know it's done a bunch of things. I want to show you some preferences that are important. If you're going to use this tool, these AI tools, they suck performance out of your processors. So you really want a computer with a GPU, a good one. So if you go to your processor, you want to set it to whatever your graphics processor is. In my case, it's the Mac Studio that I'm running. You don't want to set it to CPU. It'll slow down way too much. That's only if you're running into compatibility issues. And in your preferences, you have some things like enabling lens corrections. There's a thing called autopilot. And this is what it does when you first load a photo in. And the more of these things you have enabled, the longer it will take to get that initial preview up on your screen. Okay. So for example, you can have subject detection, and I just have it set to find it by default, but I'm telling it not to look for faces. I'm telling it not to auto upsize, and you can tell it when to automatically kick in its sharpening routine. You know, how blurry or how soft does it have to be? Okay, so if you disable some of these things, that initial processing will be faster, because then you can always turn things on if you want to play around with stuff. Okay, so as you can see, it's removed noise, and if you open up any of these panels, you get strength sliders and detail sliders and basic stuff. If you use a raw image, you won't have those because it'll work on the raw image. It detected a subject. So let's look at this. It says detected a subject. And if I hover the mouse over the subject, you can see what it found. And it's not too bad. It's pretty good. There is an ability to refine the subject. And if it doesn't look good, you can change it. And this, in my opinion, is actually the weakest part of the current version of the software. I think Sharpen AI is actually better for this. But if you click the refine button, you have some options. You can say, is it a portrait? Is it a landscape? Or is there no subject? And it just says nothing. And then you can use something called the AI brush, which I am not a fan of at this point, to either add or subtract. And the reason why I'm not a fan of this AI brush is because it's not your typical just dumb brush tool, which is what I would actually prefer in this case. But let's just say I wanted to subtract something. I could click subtract and say, yeah, I'm not going to sharpen the blurry prop because the blurry prop. But notice it's grabbing these regions. It's not operating like an actual brush. It's not the end of the world. Okay, it's not. But it's really not the best implementation of a brush, and it's something I really hope that Topaz will be improving in future versions of the software, and I'm pretty sure that they will based on my experience with other stuff. You could also refine the softness of the edge to give it a little more edge softness. And when you're happy with that, you click done. Okay, so now I've got this subject. And why is that important? It's because when it removes noise or does sharpening, there's an option for only sharpening the subject right here, sharpen only. So it went through and it sharpened up using its standard sharpening algorithm. And I mean, I'll tell you what, that's pretty awesome right there. So here's our before, and that's sharpened. I mean, this was just without me doing anything. Now, sometimes these sharpening algorithms can be a little heavy-handed, and especially if you're working with raw files, you want to dial back the strength of that sharpening a little bit, because even at low levels, it's doing a lot of work. Now, the standard sharpening is kind of a typical sharpening algorithm, but then you can get into the AI options for sharpening, and that's this lens blur model and the motion blur model. And these take more horsepower. And you can see what they do. It's really strong. And this is where you've got to be really careful, because the sharpening can be really overdone, even with the default settings. But again, if we look back to see where we started with, this was a shot that was pretty darn soft with that motion blur. And we go here, look what pops out of that. The last bit that you can work with inside this interface, it does have a recover face tool. I've not used that much. Your mileage may vary. That's kind of what I consider an experimental feature. And then there's an enhanced resolution feature. And this can be useful even if you're not upscaling it, but it can actually sharpen images very mildly by just turning on this box. So let me turn off the sharpen. And I'm just going to go back to here, and I'm going to click enhance resolution and just see what happens. And its little progress bar is running. You see, this stuff takes a lot of horsepower. And you see how it just, even at its very basic level, just provided some nice sharpness compared to where we were. So here's before and here's after. And you have different options for the algorithm here. So you can choose natural graphic. I don't know what the real difference is. I think low resolution would be like if you had a JPEG or something that was a low res image. But sometimes that's all you need. You don't even need to run the sharpening algorithm. You can just click this enhance resolution box, and that's really nice. Lastly, there's the upscale option. So by default, it's just normal. Now, this was an image that I captured with my Nikon Z9, so it's a 45 megapixel image. I've got no real reason to up-res it, right? Well, what if you're cropping in really tightly? What if you need to get things back? You can double the size or even go to some maximum amount, which would be ridiculous. This is 32. That's, I don't know. That's too many pixels. And you can see now you start to see little weird things happen. And those little weird things are AI artifacts. And I know that there was a question about that. You start to see these funny little jaggedy things appear. This is the nature of AI. It is interpreting pixels where none exist. so you might see that. So you got to be really careful when you run this these algorithms, and try not to overcook it. But the nice thing here is that it works. I've up-resed images from my iPhone, and sometimes when it works really well. The downside is that sometimes it's still artificial intelligence. It doesn't know any better, and you can sometimes create weird, strange artifacts. So you got to be very careful. And then when you're done, I'm just going to click Save to Lightroom Classic, and you see it's saving this as a TIFF format like I had specified. So this, and it takes a little while. Now, this image really showcased the ability of this software to remove some blur. Okay, that motion blur is basically gone. And I'm going to tell you, I had a lot of semi-acceptable shots from this air show I went to in September. And this product, along with Sharpen AI, which was what I was using at the time, it hadn't come out yet, they really saved a lot of those shots. And for that, I am really blown away. Okay, so it's going to save it. It made this thing monstrous, 16,000 by 11,000. That's a lot of pixels. That's 176 megapixel image. What does that mean? It means I can crop way in now. You can see that it's gigantic. There's the dimensions. But now if I want to zoom in, that's I think 200%. Let me go back out here. Let's go to 100%. If I wanted to crop, hey, I could crop way in now. And now if we look at my crop dimensions, I'm still 56 megapixels. Is that, am I right? 6 times 9, right? Or 54 megapixels. Yeah, I could still do arithmetic. Anyway, you can see the benefit of having all of those operations in one tool. Now, let me show you something in the noise department. Okay, so here's an image that I've shot in Ireland, and this image was captured indoors by candlelight at ISO 25,600, which was the in-spec max of my D850 camera that I was using. And I'm going to send this one, to get the best possible output, I'm going to send this one out as raw. Okay, so if we zoom in on here, I've tried to apply noise reduction. Let me turn this off. I've got noise reduction really cranked up. I want you to see just how much noise there is in this image if I turn noise reduction completely off. You see that? Now, if you send the image to the software, to the photo AI as a raw file, okay, it's going to save it out as a DNG. You don't have to worry about your pre-processing. But if you have processed your image, made adjustments to it, you can synchronize or copy paste those adjustments to the image that comes back in, and that works too. So what I'm going to do is, instead of, and this is the hint, instead of saying edit in, you have to go over to the file menu, and under this little option called plug-in extras, you find Photo AI, which is down here at the bottom. And then it launches the plugin, and it's going to really work on the noise removal. And I'm going to say, let's refine the subjects. So here's what it detected just as the default. I'm going to say, no, this is a portrait. And now you can see, if you look over here, it's pretty much selected the person. So that's not too bad, actually. I'm pretty pleased with that. Just make the edge a little softer. And then I'm going to click done. And then let's click sharpen and see what that gives me. And I'll try these other algorithms just to experiment. You can see that it's doing a pretty good job of bringing this detail back. And I can even hit the enhance resolution option. Now, just remember, when you're working on this as a raw file, that anything you do here, anything that looks maybe weird or has an artifact, is going to get baked into what comes back into your image. So you don't want to over sharpen this. I'm going to dial the strength of the sharpening down just a little bit. It's got to rerun it every single time. And now I'm going to say save to Adobe Lightroom Classic down here at the bottom. I'm not going to up-res this. I don't want to be here all week. It would be kind of painful. And you can see it's taking my NEF, which is my Nikon file, and converting it to DNG. There is nothing wrong with this. Your DNG will still preserve all of your camera settings, just like what came out of the camera in its native format. It just takes a little while to process. As you can see. And if you have an older computer, you might want to go out and get a cup of coffee. So this is not something I would want to run every single image through just you know, just as a default. I would definitely save this tool for my best images or ones that I really want to work with. And we'll get back here. It's almost done saving the file, and then it re-imports. So there was a question, I'm going to answer it because it's a good one, which is if you're doing the raw file from Lightroom, do you make a virtual copy first? No, you don't have to, because what Topaz does is always saves a copy of the file as DNG. So here is this file that is DNG. Now, what you can see is that this image, let's see, when did this one come in? It's this is the one that I just got, I think, because I've been playing with this same guy. But what I can do is I can synchronize my settings from my original one. I can synchronize basically everything that I did except for, including my masks, except for the sharpness settings. There we go. And now, if we look at this guy, oops, there it is. And it has all of the, and I'm going to turn off the sharpening, set it to 0, because I don't want to over sharpen this guy. Turn off all the noise reduction. And that's, you know, I got to say, for ISO 25,000, which is the max on that camera, the in-spec max, that's a pretty darn good improvement. And you can always refine that. So you just have to remember that if you want to work with the raw file, you have to use the file plugin extras pathway instead of the edit in pathway. And remember that any sharpening that it puts in will get baked into that file. It is not going to be something you can undo. So what are some things that you can do? And I'm going to go back to my presentation here, some best practices that you can do if you're going to choose to use this software. Because like I said, it's still in its infancy. It's still in a 1.0 form, but I think it's got a lot of promise. Make sure that you've got your GPU enabled and you're taking advantage of it. So I always manually set the preference, like I showed you, to use that graphics processing unit. This is where having a GPU that's got a bunch of cores and a lot of memory will really help. This runs wonderfully on my Mac Studio, but if you're using an older computer, you're going to really see that. Okay, there was a question about why would I want to work on the raw image? And the answer is the noise reduction algorithms are, in my opinion, better when you clean up the original raw file by giving it raw data than if you were giving it a derivative file. I'm going to get through this and then I'm going to take the rest of the questions shortly. The output from Photo AI, from RAW, will take whatever your RAW format is, and it will save it as a new copy in DNG. It is a copy of your original file in the DNG format. The only exception would be that if you started with DNG format, if you had a DNG, then Lightroom would ask you if you want to work on a copy or overwrite the original DNG file. I would work on a copy in that case. Okay, so if you go through the raw pathway, it's going to take, you know, your Canon file, your Olympus file, whatever you have, your Nikon file, and it will save it as DNG, and so that's a completely separate copy. You don't need to do the virtual copy thing. Okay, so make sure your graphics card is enabled. Disable any non-essential autopilot AI features. This will just speed up your initial processing, and that's especially true if you're using a computer that's you know, more than 2 or 3 years old. You're really going to see that. Always look at your sharpening results at 100% before you commit to them, because if you're in RAW, or even if you're not in RAW, they always get baked in. Okay, so if you go through the TIFF-based workflow, they're still baked into that TIFF. You'd have to redo it potentially. So always check, look for artifacts. It's not perfect. And if you really got a tricky image where maybe that auto masking isn't working for you, maybe it's just not finding it, there are some alternatives. You can run this plugin on a separate layer in Photoshop and then just mask things out using the Photoshop masking tool, or the original 3 plugins that are all AI based, and they're all still very good, like Sharpen AI or Noise AI. And I mostly use Sharpen AI. Those do have a regular brush, and you can just brush in and mask your subject with the brush that you're used to. And like I said, that AI brush thing is the weakest part of Photo AI, in my opinion. I'm being honest here. But there are other ways to use the software that doesn't rely on its automatic masking, if you just use it in one of these other tools like Photoshop. So I've already kind of alluded to these, but I want to make sure everyone is aware of some drawbacks. The AI models, the algorithms, they're not perfect. They can work incredibly well, but they can also generate artifacts. They can overcook and over sharpen your images if you're not careful. They tend to be aggressive, especially with the sharpening. Consider backing off those sharpening settings from the defaults, especially if you're in a raw workflow where you don't want to over sharpen things, or just using that enhanced resolution option. The AI algorithms are very GPU and processor intensive. You're gonna probably want a faster computer. It just happens that way. And again, like I said, the masking brush is very primitive compared to what they've got in their other plugins. I am hoping that this gets resolved in future versions. I don't know. I don't have any insight. I'm just a user. I bought the software, so that's where we're at. So that's kind of my thing. Oh, and there's one other little thing. If you are a Z9 shooter, okay, as I know some of you are, it will not read the native high efficiency NEF format that the Z9 can do. No other Nikon does it. So if you're shooting in NEF and it's high efficiency RAW, it'll just return an error. It won't open. The workaround is to simply, if you want to, I've made an export preset in Lightroom that just saves my image as a DNG and re-imports it. And then that DNG has no problem being read by the Photo AI program, okay? Or if you just set your Z9 to use the lossless compression, the standard lossless compression, those get read just fine too. So those are the drawbacks right now as I see them, okay? And that's where we're at. So